are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is the one that inspired the girl with the dragon tattoo. Now, fiction is something we all know like the back of our hands. However, we don't often realize how much real life inspires them. This woman's story is still not solved today, but her legacy forever lives on. By the way, I am posting an incredible amount of strange, spooky content for ODDtober, which is my series this month, and I always post content like this, so if it's something you're interested in, please make sure to subscribe down below. And if you want to make a girl happy, all you have to do is comment something nice and give it maybe a thumbs up, and I would be the happiest ever. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1984 in Sweden, and Katrine da Costa was a 28-year-old with pale, freckled skin, light hair, and was a beauty. But behind those eyes, if you looked close enough, you could see the sadness. She was born Katrine Beatrice Backstrom in Luleå, and by this point in her life, she had already been married and divorced and had a little son who was put into foster care, unfortunately, because of Katrine's drug addiction. Because of her drug addiction, she was struggling to make money, and that's when she began to work as a sex worker in Stockholm. And there was a 600-meter road that all of the women would go and work on every single night. It was June 10th of 1984, and Katrine was working when she vanished. Her mother was very close to her and would talk to her daily, so she knew almost immediately that something had happened to Katrine, and she went to the police with this information. However, because of Katrine's career path, the police didn't seem to care or believed that she got herself into whatever trouble she was in and didn't want to help her mother search whatsoever. But on July 18th, they would have no choice but to get involved because her body had just been found. Well, only part of it. You see, it was under a highway overpass in Solna, which was just outside of Stockholm where she worked, and it was in bin bags, or what we call over here trash bags. All of her remains were not found in these bags, but 3 weeks later they would find more about a mile away from this first area in trash bags once again. However, there were still many body parts missing. Her head, internal organs, one breast, and her bikini area were not inside, and in fact, they were never found. However, because they had her hands, they could positively identify her as Katrine da Costa. However, the cause of death could not be determined. This case made huge news, and it was called stickmordic, and this meant the cutting up murder. Now, the investigators eventually went to talk to Katrine's co-workers to see if they knew any of the clients that could have done something like this, and at the time they believed that they did, and after talking to these women, they had their first suspect. Not only did these sex workers say that this was the man that they believed had done it, but the suspect's wife's father had come forward with the same information. This man was a pathologist named Teet Harm, or at least that's what I believe the pronunciation would be, and he worked at a forensics laboratory. He was pale and thin with cheekbones jutting out, small eyes, and uneven eyebrows. Now, according to the Thinking Sideways podcast, these sex workers had said that they had seen him there multiple times getting different women to go with him. However, he would say that he had only ever been there once after a fight with his wife and never any more. It was also found that the institute that he worked at was right in the middle of the two dumping areas where these trash bags with Katrina's body inside were found. Right in the middle. And his wife's father had come forward because Teet's wife had actually died of suicide 2 years prior, except for many believed it wasn't suicide at all. She had been found hanging from her bedpost, all dressed up, as though she was about to go out for the night. It was a very suspicious case, and even the police found it hard to believe that it was just a suicide. Teet's wife was wanting to divorce him before he died, and after her body was found, Teet just seemed very cold and callous about the whole thing, and many of his coworkers said that he was arrogant and cold on the daily. Some of the police believed that he had murdered his wife, but they had zero evidence to actually prove it. But then when Katrine's body went missing and was found, that is when Teet's wife's father went to the police once again and said, "You didn't listen when I told you that my son-in-law killed my daughter, but I believe he is struck again." And I found from the 13 O'Clock podcast that Teet had been a pathologist, so he'd been a doctor, but he specialized in cases of strangulation. And he had also written many papers on this, the first of which was published 2 months after his wife's death. Police searched his home to see if they could find any evidence connecting him to Katrine's murder. They found knives, which is kind of common in a home. I'm not sure they found any like huge knives or anything. And they also found violent videos of sexual activities inside. However, they arrested him and couldn't really keep him just on those charges, so they had to release him. However, they did have another suspect already lined up at this point. His name was Thomas Augen, and his wife believed he could have murdered Katrine. Now, at first, his wife went to the police because she feared that her baby daughter, and his daughter as well, was being sexually assaulted by him. And thankfully, upon examination, they didn't find any signs of this. However, they did find that Thomas was Teet's co-worker, meaning they could have done something together. He was also a general practitioner, just like Teet. Once, Thomas actually invited Teet over to have dinner with his family, and Thomas's wife immediately felt like something was very wrong with Teet. Disliked him so much that she refused to ever invite him back into her home. At this point, she did divorce Thomas and took the baby away from him because she had these gut feelings about him. But now, Thomas could also be involved in Katrine's murder. However, it would take until the next year, which was 1985, for anything to ever connect Thomas to Teet. Because when this first allegation came out, it was just the allegation of Thomas doing something to their daughter. But now that their daughter was about 2, she began to talk about her father and a woman and dismemberment. Of course, she didn't use that word, I'm sure, but basically that her father was cutting up this woman's body with another man. And that is when the police officially connected Thomas to Katrine, but also to Teet, because this child said that it was Teet that was with her father. So at this point, they had a child psychologist and psychiatrist talk to this now 2.5-year-old child and get this statement to bring to trial as evidence. And they also had 2 other witnesses under their belt to go to trial and to hopefully charge these 2 men with murder. This was a couple from Stockholm that owned a photography business that around the time of Katrine's murder would have this set of photographs come in that needed to be developed, because of course it was a very different time back then. You had to send pictures in to be developed so you could take them, and apparently these looked like body parts, and these owners were very disturbed, and these 2 men came forward to collect them, and these owners asked them point blank, "What is this? Why did you make us develop these photos?" And these 2 men basically in a way tried to say that they were investigators and that they were doing a top secret case and that they needed to be quiet and not tell anybody about it. And of course, because they thought that these were some secret agents, the owners didn't tell anyone. But now that it came out about Teet and Thomas going to trial for a murder and a dismemberment as well, this couple came forward and said, "Look, these 2 men that came into our shop that day looked just like Teet and Thomas." The trial was in January of 1988, and the jury found them guilty. However, some of the jurors went to reporters and began to talk about the case before the sentence was actually given. and because of this it was labeled a mistrial. So then they went into the second trial, and that one didn't end much better because the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare had to look into this case because there was a public outrage that nothing was being done. But what they determined was that Katrine's body was never fully found and a cause of death couldn't actually be determined, so there was no way to say if she died under mysterious circumstances, and Teet and Thomas were then acquitted. The courts did say they believed that Teet and Thomas dismembered Katrine. However, the statute of limitations had already expired on that crime, so nothing could be done on it. And the judges even said that they believed that the men had murdered her, but they also couldn't rule out the fact that it could have just been an overdose and then the men dismembered her after that. So basically, there was nothing that could be done. The Swedish feminist movement was actually marching the streets because they were so angered about the violence of men against women and their ability to get away with it, and they pushed and pushed and pushed for this case not to just get lost and these men to just completely have freedom and act like nothing had happened. And this actually caused in 1991 for both of the men to be stripped of their ability to work as a doctor under the Swedish Authority for Medical Negligence for Doctors. Several appeals on their parts to try to get their jobs back have been denied thus far, and now there is another suspect that is thought to possibly have a connection to this case, and this was after this original trial was over. He was allegedly a butcher named Stanislav Gonarka, and he had been in a mental institute for killing a woman and dismembering her and putting her in trash bags. Now, he had been released just prior to Katrine's disappearance. However, he died 3 years after Katrine had been murdered, and the police had dismissed him in this case altogether because they were so focused on Teet and Thomas. And they had also allegedly found Stanislav's name in Katrine's diary where she kept all of her clients. Katrine's death is technically still unsolved today, and it was extremely publicized, many calling these two doctors the vampire doctors. In 2006, Teet and Thomas actually demanded $4.8 million in damages for lost income because they had their jobs taken from them. However, going through several different trials, it finally landed on the verdict that they were not entitled to their money. This case was huge inspiration for the international success of the novel The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Now, if you don't know, the original Swedish title for this book was Men Who Hate Women. It is a psychological thriller written by Stieg Larsson, I think is how you say his name. He combined his knowledge of this murder case of Katrine and also an experience he had when he was 15 years old where his friend Lisbeth was sexually assaulted by multiple men, and he basically froze, couldn't do anything to help her, and he asked for forgiveness from her and she never gave that to him, and all these years later he still feels horrible about it, and so he even named the main character in his novels after that friend, and her name was Lisbeth. There are now 6 published books in the series and also 5 movies, but there's actually a mystery surrounding the author's death, because he had died a year before the first book was even published. 6 months before he had died, he'd gone to the publisher's office with 2 completed novels in hand and was basically signed right then and there because they were so good. That's such an uncommon thing to happen. However, it happened for this author, and then 6 months later, he died climbing 7 flights of stairs to his office after the elevator had broken. Some believe it wasn't of natural causes, though. Some believe he was murdered. You see, he was an investigative reporter for a magazine called Expo, which was his own magazine, and he would often receive death threats due to what he was talking about. He basically exposed the higher ups, and he wanted to keep it a very, very open and honest magazine, and he didn't care what that cost him, except for when it came to his girlfriend. He was very worried about her safety at all times. In fact, that is why they never got married and they didn't ever have the same bank account, and when they went out together they both wore disguises. But some say that his girlfriend is actually the one who killed him, because they had often worked on these novels together, and she was the one that continues to work on them after he had passed. Some of even his closest co-workers and friends say that they don't even believe he could have written the novels, and that possibly it was his girlfriend all along, because they had worked with him and they had known his style of writing, and it was horrible. And these books are an international success. Is it that we want it to be a murder mystery because of the nature of what he wrote, or because there is actual evidence pointing to that? Who knows? Who knows if he even wrote the books? But I hate to even say that, because he has passed and his legacy is his books, so I don't know, but I just thought that was an interesting tidbit to add on here at the end. But do you think that the girl with the dragon tattoo has any sort of similarities to this case? I, in fact, have never read the books, so I can't really say for sure, but I would love to know if I should read them, and if it seems like there are similarities to this case that are big enough to pick up on at least. But who do you think killed Katrine? Or do you think that it was a murder at all, or just an overdose and then dismemberment? I don't really know why someone would do that, but I guess you never know what's wrong with people and why they do the things they do. I mean, that's why we talk about killers all the time. That's why we want to know inside their mind, because sometimes you don't understand. But if it was murder, do you think it was the doctors or the butcher? There are so many questions in this case, and I just feel so horrible for what Katrine's family had to go through with these men being released, because there just wasn't enough to say that she was murdered. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that she was a sex worker. People didn't want to believe that she could have been taken advantage of. And it's horrible how common that is. But don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.